Hello, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on when you are going to watch this. I just wanted to say first that this seminar is going to be recorded and it's going to be available through the LINHD website. I would like to welcome Jyothi. Jyothi is a guest researcher at UNED, and she came with an CLS INFRA grant, and well, she has been here for 1.5 months, I think. She comes from IIT Indore in India, and she has been doing some research on literature and geolocalization of tombs related to a massacre that happened in India. She will surely tell us more about this. I'm very pleased to have her here, and this is also the first seminar of a seminar series that we have just started at the Laboratorio de Innovación en Humanidades Digitales at UNED. We are in the room right now. I hope that, well, this is the first of many. For the moment, this is the first of 3 that we are going to hold this spring. And well, it's very exciting that this is the first one and very internationalizing, having it in English, which, as I was telling Joe, well, this is not very normal in UNED, where most of the activities are in Spanish. So Joe, welcome. And whenever you want, you can start with your presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for that welcome link. So I will share my screen now. I hope it's visible, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So what I'm going to present today is actually part of my thesis work back in IIT in Indore in India. So what I am presenting here is actually how we make use of digital cartography and feminist geocriticism. So feminist geocriticism is actually a theory in literature, and I am combining both digital and literary techniques to locate female survivors of a Dalit massacre in India, which is Kilvenmani massacre, which took place in 1968. To give an overview of this presentation, I'll give an introduction to my work, which is actually looking at multiple massacres in India after Indian independence, that is 1947. But in this, I'll be focusing only on Kilvenmani, and then I'll give a background to this massacre, the material and methodology that we are using, and also the results and preview of cartography. We'll also take a look at the mapping projects and resources that anybody who's interested in making use of digital cartography for their humanities projects are interested in. So to give an introduction, my research work is primarily at the intersection of Dalit studies or massacre studies, feminism, and geocriticism. So Dalits are actually an underprivileged group of people in India. Based on their caste location, they are in the very last of the caste hierarchy in India. And because of this, they've been denied a number of resources and privilege. And because of their caste, been multiple massacres in India, especially after independence, but these are seldom studied, especially from a feminist or female survivor point of view. So what we are doing is to make use of geocriticism, which is actually a theory that gives more importance to place in literature, that is settings in literature. And by combining feminism to geocriticism, the focus shifts to the female survivors that we are looking. So the primary focus of research is will be on the female survivors in the spaces that they are located at. So in this research, we are trying to understand the relation between space, caste, and gender in Dalit massacres. To give an overview of the major Dalit massacres in India, these are the primary locations in which major massacres has taken place. And from this visualization itself, I've used mostly QGIS for the entire mapping in this project. While the ones that I'm presenting today are mostly based on QGIS too. So when we look at this primary mapping, we can ask questions like, does the spatial location of Dalits have anything to do with the frequency of the massacres? Or more importantly, the research question that we are asking in this research project, that is, where are the women of independent India's unheard Dalit massacres? So the research objectives as of now in this research on Kilvenmani is to make use of feminist geocriticism and digital cartography to identify both real and fictional survivors and spaces. And by this, I mean that I'm looking at both real narratives on the massacre and also fictional or literary representations of the massacre, to identify the female survivors and also the spaces that are represented in these narratives. When we look at the narratives, we can see that there is a use of fictional spaces and also real spaces. Hence, we've created a database on the survivors, also the authors of the narratives on the massacre, and the female or the feminist activists who were involved in rehabilitating the survivors of the massacre. And this has resulted in the creation of a database of the survivors, especially the female survivors of Kilvenmani massacre. And using this database, I've tried to create an interactive final mapping, which will again be published as a spatial archive, like a website, which will be openly accessible for the future researchers to conduct further research on this massacre. So to give a background of Kilvenmani massacre, this actually took place in Kilvenmani, which is a small village in Tamil Nadu, India. So this is the actual map of India, and Tamil Nadu is a state which is located in the southern part of India. And there, Dalits are mostly, we can see that the Dalits are mostly categorized based on their caste location in the outskirts of villages. So what actually happened during the massacre is not researched in detail. These are like the primary mappings of where what happened during the massacre. Like there was in 1967, there was a rise of Marxist party in Tamil Nadu, especially in the Tanjavur district where Kilvenmani is located. And here, the rise of Marxist party resulted in the creation of an organized union of laborers who demanded an increase in wage from the landowners. And the landowners were belonging to the upper caste, and they were mostly exploiting the Dalit laborers. So this resulted in a clash between the upper caste landlords and lower 44 Dalits who took refuge in a hut were burned alive. So this is the primary backdrop of the massacre. And as of now, we can see that there are economic, cultural, and political events that led to the massacre. And the primary research on the massacre, though there are multiple reasons, the caste aspect behind this massacre is not much researched in detail. So like I said, this massacre is primarily took place by torching of 44 Dalits in a hut. And the hut owner was Ramaya, and these Dalits took refuge in this hut of Ramaya mainly because he was a Dalit landowner, and he people was the only person, his hut will not be attacked. But as he was also a Dalit, his hut was also attacked, resulting in the killing of 44 Dalits, mainly women and children. When we look at the narratives on this massacre, especially newspaper reports, etc., we can see that there was an apathy from the police force and the state because of the caste identity of the victims. That is mostly because they were from the Dalits and laborer caste. This case of the massacre was not reported in detail or was not dealt with in a proper legal manner. And we can also see by trying to map the survivors that caste actually determined the location of Dalits in Tamil Nadu. And this is also researched in detail through the concept of Harichan Cheri. Cheris were the places where the Dalits were located, and Kilvenmani is actually a Cheri in which a group of Dalits were located, and because of their concentration in a particular place, it made it easier for the upper caste landlords to locate them and kill them. And when we look at the research on Kilvenmani also, we can see that there are multiple references to the agrarian or economic reasons, like the demand of the laborers for an increase in wage. All these aspects are researched in detail, but the caste aspect of it or the gender aspect of it is not researched in detail. So taking a cue from the existing research, we are trying in this research to fill the gap on female narrators of the massacre, especially by using the methodology that I have explained in detail previously. So the materials and methodology part is that first we have collected data from English literary text, which is both fictional and non-fictional, and then also online newspaper reports, research articles, court orders, petitions, etc. And this method of collecting data is actually in accordance with geocriticism. Like geocriticism is about locating multiple narratives on a particular place. And then we visualized this data using digital cartography, and then analyzed it to understand the relation between space, caste, and gender in these massacre. So the fictional text that we looked at in these in this massacre, for now we are only looking at the English literary narratives. Like there are multiple narratives in the mother tongue of Tamil Nadu, that is Tamil. But for now we are only looking at English text. Though in future we also intend to expand on the narratives that are available in Tamil. We are looking at novels and visual narratives, that is films primarily, and also non-fictional texts like essays and documentary. And there is only one documentary on this entire massacre, that is Ramayam Kodise, which came out in 2005. So this is the methodology that we are using. We initially located the place, that is Kilvenmani, which was located in Tanjavur district of Tamil Nadu. And then we located the narratives on the place. And then we located the female survivors on these from the female survivors of the massacre based on these narratives to create a geo database and a visualization. So the first stage of mapping was to manually geopass all the location of the survivors, especially the real places and the fictional spaces. And then we assigned a location, that is the latitudinal and longitudinal values using geocoding. And finally, we also geo-rectified these maps into historical maps, especially through using QGIS. So this is a primary result that we got. This is a zoomed out version of the location of the female survivors. You can see India, the whole map of India, and then the location of Tamil Nadu. And from Tamil Nadu, if you zoom in to Kilvenmani, this is how the survivors are located. And in this map, you can see that there are historical representations and also women from each of the source that we are looking at. So I'm not going into detail on all the texts that we are looking, but we can see that there are particular clusters that are forming in this areas, especially around Kilvenmani. Kilvenmani, actually, we can see that in Kilvenmani, all the lower caste survivors are located closer to Kilvenmani, which becomes a Dalit space, whereas the upper caste women are located further away from the actual site of the massacre, which in turn makes them safer and less vulnerable to gender-based or caste-based violence. So one fictional text that we are looking at is Purudipunal, and we can see that in all the texts that we have looked at, there is a use of mythical character and also fictional and non-fictional characters. In this, there is only fictional characters, but the settings that are used in this narrative is actually geolocatable real places from ranging from Delhi to Tanjavur and Tiruvarur. And there is, from this text, we were able to locate a cluster of female survivors in one particular place, that is Tiruvarur. Gypsy Goddess is another text that we are looking at. It is a semi-fictional novel, and it is the only novel that looks at the Dalit female experiences of the massacre, in contrast to the other narratives that are looking only at the massacre, only from a male perspective. So in this also, there is a use of real places in and around Nagapattinam and Kilvenmani, and there's a use of a mythical character, LINHD, who is actually a deity that is a mix of the colonial invaders in India and also the Dalits. So this mixing is also represented, mixing between the colonizers and the colonized is also represented through LINHD. And in this whole narrative, the entire place of Nagapattinam, in which this story or the narrative is located, is represented as a female character. So this mapping shows the caste-based location of Kilvenmani women. You can see that the clustering of upper caste women takes place in areas away from Kilvenmani, whereas the lower caste are located closer to the site of the massacre. So the caste of the survivors actually determine their location, which in this case is Kilvenmani, and this again resulted in gender and caste-based violence against the survivors. The other text that we are looking at are Heat. It's again a novel that is set on the massacre, but there are no direct references on the massacre. We are also looking at multiple films. This film is actually an adaptation of another text that we are looking at, and in all these narratives that we have looked at, there is a use of either real or fictional space. So in this film, the fictional space is Satyapuri, and this on deeper reading of this text, we can understand that Satyapuri is actually a fictional representation of Kilvenmani itself. So the author actually makes use of a fictional place to talk about a real massacre in order to avoid any controversy that might arise on referring the actual name of the massacre. So Satyapuri, the fictional space, also intersects with Kilvenmani, and this is another cluster that we got where the female survivors are mostly concentrated. Aravindan is also another narrative that is mostly written from a male perspective. Okay, Virumandi is another film. But these films do not go deeper into the massacre or the female survivors. So in this movie Asuran, we can see that the settings are mostly fictionalized, and the places that are shown in the film are actually similar to Kilvenmani, and there is a reference to real places like Tikkur, Vadakur, and Tirunelveli, and these are all places closer to Kilvenmani, but the entire film doesn't refer to the massacre as such. But there is a reference of killing of 44 Dalits, through which we can identify that the film is actually looking at Kilvenmani. And in this film also, we can see marginalization of upper caste women, where the upper caste women are mostly unnamed and silenced in the entire narrative. So in the map that we have I have given here, we can see that the spatial distribution of women is different. Like Dalit women are mostly concentrated in Takkur, whereas the upper caste women are located in a much safer space called Vadakur. So this binarization between spaces and gender, also spaces in caste, also is visible through mapping, like how Dalit or upper caste are located in one particular place called Tikkur, and how upper caste people are located in another place that is exactly opposite to the location of the Dalits. To look at the non-fictional or real survivors, we can see that all female victims who died in the massacre, since they were all taking refuge in Ramaya's hut where they were killed, they are all located in one particular location. But the presence of fictional women makes it makes the distribution more scattered. Like in this map, we can clearly see how the women are scattered in different places, especially the mythical women and also the historical representations. And in this, if you look, Kirubalini and etc. are Pachiammal. They are people they are women who belong to upper caste. These are other like non-fictional narratives that we're looking at. There is an essay, a collection of essay by Maithili Shivaraman. She's the first female who do a documentation on the Dalit survivors, but even she doesn't include the names of any of the female survivors in her narrative. And there is also a documentary on this massacre by Bharati Krishna Kumar. But even in this, we could not find any female representation or female interviewees throughout the documentation. And from the online newspaper reports also, we were unable to get the names or actual identity of the female survivors or their location. But there is mention about the women activists and writers related to massacre who took initiative in land redistribution and also how to their efforts to rehabilitate the survivors of the massacre. And on an analysis of the newspaper reports from 2009 to 2021, we saw that there is an increase in the number of articles on the massacre, especially on the year 2018 that marked the 50th anniversary of the massacre. And then there is also a resistance to use the term Dalit or to give more information about the female survivors or gender-based violence, for example, rape or other physical assault that was that happened as part, in contrast to the mention of rape or the other physical atrocities, gender-based atrocities that were committed. These were such instances are mentioned in the fictional narratives, but not in the real narratives. So on the whole, we found that the online newspaper reports focused on the feminist activists and organizations post the massacres, and there are also varying accounts of the massacre post on the post-massacre scenario in the village of Kilvenmani. For instance, some newspaper reports said that the Dalit survivors were rehabilitated and they were living in a much better condition. But other newspaper reports mentioned that they were still residing in the same conditions as the massacre initially took place. And on comparison between the fictional and real survivors, we found that there is more fictional characters in as opposed to historical representations, mainly because we were not able to identify the female survivors from real female survivors from any of the non-fictional narratives. Their names were anonymized or they were not at all mentioned. So there is a general lack of a focus on female survivors of the massacre. And also the focus of films or fictional narratives were mostly on female protagonists, on male protagonists, in contrast to the actual scenario where feminist activists or females actually took the initiative to rehabilitate the survivors or to rescue them. But in the fictional narratives, we saw the rise of male protagonists or a heroic image who came to save the survivors after the massacre. Only Meena Kandasamy makes use of a female protagonist in her narrative. And we also saw that there's an absence of female voices in the narrative on caste, especially in the fictional and real narratives. And there are also a lack of a reference to gender-based violence in the whole research on the massacre. When we look at space, we can see that there is a use of both fictional and non-fictional space in the narratives on massacre. For instance, there are fictional spaces that are closer to the actual sites like Kilvenmani, Nagapattinam, and Tanjavur. And of all the texts that we studied, we saw that 3 of the texts make use of fictional spaces, whereas 2 make use of real spaces that are closer to Kilvenmani, and 2 makes use of Kilvenmani itself to refer to the massacre. And based on this, we were able to identify clusters where the female survivors were located. And there are also direct references to the Kilvenmani massacre in most of the narratives. And the clusters that we identified based on our database is that we found 33 fictional and 5 historical representations in Kilvenmani, whereas in Nagapattinam there were 2 fictional representations. Thiruvarur, Nachiyar Koil, Tekkur, etc. are other clusters that we found. So in this map, you can see that these are the major areas where the female survivors are clustering. So in Kilvenmani, there are 33 fictional survivors. And of these 33 fictional survivors, the fictional women, almost all of them were belonging to a lower caste as well. And and in the figure 8, you can see that of these clusters, there is a kind of binarization. Like Kilvenmani becomes the area where all the Dalit survivors were located, whereas Irinjur is where the upper caste women were located. And this kind of binarization is seen in other fictions as well, which resulted in the creation of Vadakur, Tekkur as upper caste and lower caste places. And from this, we can see that the location of the upper caste women in safer spaces made them safer in contrast to the lower caste survivors who were actually located in the together in a particular area. So it became easier to locate the Dalit survivors and to commit violence against them. So from the caste-based location, we were able to see that upper caste women were located in Melitiru, Irinjiur or Vadakur, and lower caste were located mainly in Kilvenmani or Tekkur. We also did a primary mapping of the authors on the massacre, and we found that majority of the authors are males. Of the 1907 were women, and these are only the English writers. And even the female authors, when they wrote, we could find that female authors were more interested in expanding on the nuances of the female Dalit experiences, in contrast to male authors who only showed a male heroic protagonist, which was totally in contrast to the actual scenario, as it was mostly feminist activists and females who took initiative in rehabilitating the victims of the massacre. And so, when we look at the location of the authors, we were able to see that the authors who were located closer to the site of the massacre, or who were born in Kilvenmani, were more able to express the details of the massacre and to give the experiences of the survivors, in contrast to the authors who were located far away from the site of the massacre. We also looked at the land laws on the massacre, and we found that there was a restructuring of the land laws after the massacre to ensure that land was redistributed to Dalits and in order to improve their living conditions. And female activists and organizations took part in this process of restructuring land laws. And there is also a presence of feminist activists and organizations in the efforts to rehabilitate the survivors of Dalit of Kilvenmani massacre. And all those survivors, all those feminist activists are also mapped in this in figure 10. So we can see that most of the feminist activists were located closer to the site of the massacre, which enabled them to intervene and help the Dalit massacre victims. And while looking at deeper into the court orders, letters, and petitions that we collected on the massacre, we found that there is no mention of rape or any other gender-based violence that took place during the massacre. These are not documented, and there are no cases filed based on such instances. And in conclusion, we can see that when we look at the females of Kilvenmani massacre, it is not just confined to the female survivors, but also women politicians, writers, and activists who took initiative to rehabilitate the massacre victims, and also to give to foreground the voices of female survivors. And they all played a significant role in both attempting to prevent the survivor as well as to rehabilitate the survivors post the massacre. We also found that there is an absence of research on the non-fictional narratives, and there is a need to generate the same. We found clustering of historical and fictional representations of women in particular spaces, and this resulted in the creation of Dalit female spaces and upper caste female spaces, which in turn made the Dalit women more vulnerable to large-scale violence. And one way to overcome this will be to eliminate the space, caste, and gender relation, especially in the location of Dalit women in India. And we also, on deeper analysis of newspapers and court orders, we found that there is a difference in Indian justice delivery system, especially based on caste hierarchy, as most of the culprits of this massacre who initiated the massacre, they were left unpunished. So our hypothesis that there is a connection between spatial location, caste, and gender is confirmed using digital cartography and our feminist geocritical reading of the text. So we found that the caste identity actually determines the spatial location of Dalits or female survivors, which in turn render them more susceptible to gender and caste-based violence. And this elimination of caste-based spatial segregation in Indian villages can, like through mixing the population, especially the Dalits and non-Dalits, will make it difficult to locate Dalits in huge numbers in a particular space and to commit violence against them. In section 3, I'll be just showing a few mapping projects and resources that anybody who's interested in developing DH mapping projects can make use of. So digital, when we look at a DH project, we can see that it makes use of digital methods and computational techniques as part of his research methodology, dissemination plan, and or public engagement. So in the example that I just showed, I'm making use of digital cartography, both in my research methodology and in dissemination plan. Like the final plan is to come up with a spatial archive that will be openly accessible to public, so that they can navigate through the data that we are visualizing and also conduct further research on it. So why should you use maps? If you have data or that is connected to place, and that can be from any literary or non-literary sources. And if you can use the tools to analyze place-based relationship and to understand the changes over time, then you can make use of GIS or any mapping technology for that matter. The first instance of using maps in research is John Snow's cholera map. In this, he mapped, John Snow actually mapped the location of cholera patients, and he found that the cholera was spreading through the location of hand pumps. Like so, he was, by plotting the data that he got on the people who were affected with cholera, he found that the clustering was happening near street pumps, and from there people were contacting more of cholera, and this resulted in spreading of cholera. So what are the spatial elements in a research question project or collection? Like, can you attach your data to a place that you're researching? In my case, I attached it to Kilvenmani. And if you can attach a place to the data from your research, then you can make use of spatial elements. And some of the examples of using digital mapping in arts and humanities is one famous example is of artists in Paris, where you can see how artists are located throughout the entire space in Paris, and how and why particular artists are located in specific places. So these are some other examples of digital mapping projects. There is a project that is very similar to mine, that is mapping the colonial frontier massacres in Australia. And these are other projects like lynching in America, Decima, etc. So if you have data that is much, and by data in the humanities, we mean we can look at novels or fiction, and also non-fictional narratives, and link both the fictional and non-fictional, or you can just focus on fictional data and create your own GIS data sets by assigning a coordinate value to it. So you can either geo-reference your data to an older map, like a 1970 map, or in my case, or 1968 map. And you can use this data to be displayed in the form of spatial data to conduct further analysis of it. And thereby, you can also encode narratives into the specific data points that you have, or create story maps on it. So see, these are some of the further readings and references that you can use, especially if you are interested in using GIS or mapping in your humanities research. And this is the collection of database that I have created on the survivors on Kilvenmani. And thanks to the organizers in UNIT, especially the Innovation Laboratory, and my supervisor and CLS Infra TNA program for giving me this opportunity. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Joe. I forgot to say that CLS Infra is a project linked to DARIAH, and it means Computer Literary Studies Infrastructures. So they are creating infrastructures for computer literary studies, but also offering grants, this kind of grants for doing stays at the affiliated universities. Thank you very much, because it was really interesting. And this last part, I'm sure it can be useful for many people here at UNED, but also at other places. So I would be very thankful if you could lend us your slides, or at least the last ones. I don't know if anyone has any question. I'm seeing Alba Comino here, who is very familiarized with this geolocalization, also from a feminist perspective. But I don't know if there are any commentaries or any questions. Otherwise, I wanted to ask you, I got some ideas for my own research actually, but I wanted to ask you, how did you get the places? So I understand, I mean, I don't know if in the text where you had text and not movies, you were marking the text for then geolocalizing them, or you were entering the mentioned places from the text manually? How did you?
Yeah, I have mentioned, like, I did the geopassing manually, because most of the texts are not available in the digital format. And otherwise, it means I had to digitize them and then geotag and extract it. So as of now, I've done everything manually. Even the newspaper articles and everything I've manually tagged. And
yeah, maybe for a bigger corpus would be more useful if you tag that. Yeah. Well, my other question was, what did geolocalization information system add to your research? But actually, you were explaining that in the last part. But I was wondering, it's derived from there. How would have been your research without the GIS programs that you are using?
I think you lost connection. Sorry, the last part was?
Yeah, my question was, how would your research have been if you hadn't used these GIS methodology?
Yeah, for me, I am using it, like, I have not shown any analysis part in the presentation. Now I'm using it like to show more quantitatively how this how the female survivors are located at a particular place. Without the tool, it would just be about giving them numbers and saying that, okay, this is how it happened, and this is how they are concentrating in a particular place, or whatever. So my aim in using the tool is to not just visualize it, but also to make some analysis, spatial analysis. Like I did study a few techniques after coming here in unit. So I will be incorporating all those analysis in my further research. So without this analysis, it will be just like writing about it in terms of numbers alone. And also, I want this research to reach to the general public. So that for that I have to create a website, and I'm trying to create a spatial archive of the sort in which there is an interactive mapping, and where the visitors or the readers of the website can actually go in and interact with the location of the survivors, or tweak the data a little bit and find their own conclusions, and formulate their own research questions in the sense. So in that spatial archive, I'm trying to incorporate all kinds of pedagogical and reproducible data, everything that I have collected, so that it can be used in future. Without the tool GIS, or without a spatial archive, or without the physical aspect of it, I don't think it will be reaching a wider audience. So the dissemination part is also important for me, and for that I'm heavily relying on the digital tool. And without it, I don't know how it will be interactive, or like how we will conduct more analysis of it. So the main idea is to bring in both qualitative and quantitative things in a sense.
Well, thank you very much for all of this. So if there are no other questions or commentaries, we have one written. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting project. I would like to know the method used to record the places that appear in the text. Is geosemantic annotation used? I think this is similar to what I asked.
No, it was manually reading and extracting the places, because I didn't have many texts for this. In future, because I will have to, because when I incorporate more Tamil text into it, and then I will have to use some automated techniques.
Yeah, well, this would be an interesting development, right? I mean, especially if you are using a larger corpus. Yeah, but Alba, I have kind of the same question, actually. Alba is going to explain on this also and her project in the summer course that we are doing here at LINHD. Well, I hope this has been answered, Alba. Yes, okay. Okay, well, we're going to stop here. Then I'm going to stop the recording.